Hi everyone, this week's lesson is all about coastal depositional landforms. Just before we start, let's have a little recap from last week. So the sea is very powerful, and when the sea comes in towards the land, it uses erosion to wear away the cliffs. Once that material has been worn away, it can be moved in a process called transportation. This is when the sea picks it up and carries it somewhere else. And then finally, when the sea loses its power and is nice and calm, the sea can deposit material, normally on beaches. This means dropping material. Another recap. There are two types of wave, constructive and destructive waves. Destructive waves are the erosional waves that wear away the land. But what we're talking about in this lesson is constructive waves. Constructive waves have got a big swash. This basically means a big forward movement of material, putting it onto the land and depositing it. So what we're looking at is constructive waves with big swash, and they normally occur in calm conditions. A key thing we need to think about is longshore drift. Often the waves come into the land at an angle. When the wave breaks, it uses swash to push the pebble up the beach in the same direction as the angle that it came in at. The sea then goes out, and backwash takes the sea or the pebbles back out again. The next wave comes in and uses swash to push the pebbles up the beach again. Over time, you should be able to see this zigzag pattern which moves material along a beach. This movement along the beach is called longshore drift. Probably the key landform you need to know when we're talking about depositional landforms is spits. First of all, you need longshore drift, and in order to have longshore drift you need the waves coming at an angle. So you can see, number one, the waves coming at an angle. Number two, this forms longshore drift. This longshore drift carries on until the coastline changes direction, and then the pebbles on the sand get deposited out into the sea and start to form a spit, which is a tongue-shaped piece of land. The spit grows and grows over time and often has a hooked end, because sometimes you get a secondary wind coming in and pushing the pebbles round the spit. Behind the spit becomes very calm, and in there material is deposited to form a salt marsh. A famous example can be found on the Humber coast at a place called Spurn Point or Spurn Head. The second landform is bars. In the photograph you should be able to see a place called Slapton Sands, and if you look at the diagram above me, you can see that a bar forms when a spit grows all the way across a bay. The bay then is no longer called a bay, it becomes called a lagoon, and it may eventually fill in with sand, pebbles, material and disappear. One more word that you can see on there is a tombolo. A tombolo is when a spit grows out from the land and joins to an island. Probably the most famous depositional landform is a beach. A beach forms at the back of a bay, and that's because of constructive gentle waves. You can see in the diagram that as the waves are coming into the land, they are actually getting more and more spread out in a process called refraction. This refraction actually takes the power away from the waves and means it's easier for deposition to take place. The photograph above me shows a very famous bay called Lulworth Cove. You can see the beach at the back of the bay. When I was a child, one of my favourite things to do at the beach was play in the sand dunes at the back. These are hills of sand at the back of the beach, and they're formed when the wind blows the sand up the beach and it gets trapped at the back of the beach, and then marram grass grows and stabilises the sand dunes because the roots hold the sand in place. Over time, these hills of sand get bigger and bigger and bigger until they eventually form sand dunes. Many coastal resorts don't actually like longshore drift. A place like Bridlington has longshore drift, and if it just allowed the sand to be continually zigzagged and pushed away, the beach would disappear and people would stop coming. The best way to stop longshore drift is to build these wooden groins which stick out into the sea and trap the sand. However, Building groins can have a really negative effect on the coastline. You should be able to see in the photograph above me that the two groins that are built there are clearly stopping the sand and trapping it and keeping a nice wide beach to protect the coastline. However, further on down the coastline, because the sand is not being replaced anymore because of the groins, you can see there that erosion is much quicker because the beaches are actually being starved and they're much thinner, and therefore more coastal erosion is occurring. So building groins can have a bad effect further down the coastline. You can clearly see in the photograph that this cliff has collapsed. That's because of weathering. Weathering is basically weakening the cliff. There are four types of weathering. Freeze-thaw weathering, when water gets into cracks and it expands when it freezes and makes the crack a bit bigger, and the next day it turns back into water because it melts, and that's called freeze-thaw weathering. Onion skin weathering. This happens in the summer when the rocks are continually heated and cooled, and this basically makes the outer layer of the rocks peel off like the skin of an onion. You've got chemical weathering, when acid in rainwater dissolves the cliff. And finally, you've got biological weathering. That's when plant roots get into the cracks in the cliffs and expand the cracks, weakening them. All these types of weathering make the cliffs more likely to collapse because of their own weight over time. When cliffs collapse, we call it a mass movement, and a mass movement is just the posh word for when cliffs fall down. There are four ways this can happen. Rock falls are when individual rocks fall off. Landslides are when big chunks of the cliff fall down in one go. Mud flows are where the cliffs get so full of water that they just slump down. And finally, we have slumping. This is when the cliff falls down in kind of a series of steps. And you can see that in the diagram to my left, how the stepped approach is called slumping. Okay, it's quiz time. You know what to do? Log in through joinmyquiz.com, put in the code that's above this lesson, and remember, you can try the quiz as many times as you want and it only records your highest score. Good luck. Bye now.